started. This will be focused on heat waves and wildfire impacts, so just give us a little, maybe 30 seconds. Welcome, everyone. This is disaster preparedness for livestock and large animals. We're going to be focusing on heat waves and wildfire impacts. We are going to get started in just a second, just waiting for everyone to get on right now. All right, so I think we're going to get started now. So good morning and happy Friday. Thank you for joining us for the animal preparedness webinar. My name is Tanya Toribio. I'm the regional preparedness liaison for FEMA Region 10's individual and community preparedness team. We're pleased to partner with the Offices of Emergency Management in Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington to put on this webinar. And I really want to give a special thank you and shout out to our subject matter experts with ASPCA, Spokane County Emergency Management, and American Humane, who will be speaking today. We're really looking forward to today's webinar, which is going to be focused on large animal and livestock safety and disaster preparedness. We know that with the heat waves and wildfires in recent months, this has been a big concern on many owners' minds. A warning is that this is going to be recorded and will be available afterward on our Region 10 preparedness dashboard, which we will talk about a little bit later on. To turn captions on, you can click the settings icon in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Closed captioning will be available in 7 different languages, which includes English, Spanish, Vietnamese, Russian, Korean, Chinese, and Tagalog. So let's go ahead and get started. So here's the plan for the next about 50 minutes. There will be time for a Q&A at the end, so definitely stick around. Feel free to put questions into the Q&A box, and we will answer them either throughout or if we can get to them, or at the very end, either way. We have resources and websites we'll be sharing throughout in the chat, so please keep an eye on the chat. And now I would like to present the presenters to have them briefly introduce themselves. We're going to be going through how to prepare, impacts of wildfire and heat on animals, and then the Q&A at the end. So if you guys can unmute yourselves, that would be great, and introduce yourselves.
My name is Tim Percival. I'm the Disaster Response Manager for the ASPCA, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much.
My name is Heather Kitchen. I'm Program Specialist with Spokane County Emergency Management, and I'm happy to be here to share the information with everybody.
And then I'm not too sure if Josh Carey is here. He's actually on deployment for Hurricane Ida, and he'll be on in just a few minutes. But Josh Carey is the National Director of Operations of American Humane.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those. Okay, so just going right into it. Go ahead and begin, Heather, with Build a Kit.
Okay, so these are the 4 topics that we are going to cover. We're going to start with building a kit. So let's jump right in and get going. So it's always a good idea. We want to start small, at least to have some supplies, and build up. We like to hopefully have at least 2 weeks worth of supplies. Things that you should always include are the stuff that you use for your animals on a day-to-day basis. So the food, the water, you got to put the food in the bowls. So with your large animals, you also have your lead ropes and your halters, depending on what kind of animals you have. Having the stuff to clean up after them. So your brooms, your muck forks, all that kind of good stuff. You want to make sure that you have trailer, your carrier, or your crate so that you can move those animals. And those are also good things that you can have ready and put some of your supplies into until you need to use them, because a lot of trailers have tack rooms, so you can use that area to put a lot of your supplies. Make sure you have medicine if that's needed, on top of, having just a regular first aid kit if they have special medicine that they need. Fly spray is always a really good thing to have around. Blankets for the animals, depending on the weather, for, the wildfire and heat wave stuff, not necessarily, but in the wintertime, it's really good to have. Having any kind of comfort items that they like to have, treats is usually a really good thing to help keep their stress level down. So let's go and talk about the medications a little bit more. So if they do have to take medications, you want to make sure that you have a copy of the prescription in case you have to take it somewhere else to get it filled if your vet's not available at the time to fill it. You got to have, if it needs to be kept cold, you got to have a way to do that. If you have to give it by syringe or by some other means, you want to have, enough of that to be able to give the medicine to your animals. Make sure that it's not going to expire too soon, so rotate that out as you can. Make sure you have it written down, the directions of how to take it, when to take it, and all that good stuff, and take photos of all of that in case, somebody at a shelter is going to have to be the one to do that for you in case you're not available to do that. Documentation and identification is extremely important. A lot of animals can kind of look alike, for the identification purposes, especially if somebody is not as familiar with the animals as, you are with your own animals, for sure. So you want to make sure you always have their veterinarian records, just for the purpose of keeping them safe, and, for vaccination records are really good to have. Also, this helps with proof of ownership if by chance they were picked up and not by you and brought into the shelter. So a lot of times ways we can do that is if they have ear tags, if they're branded, if they have certain tattoos, if they, you can spray paint on them, like in the picture here, they're numbered, any number of things like that. I've seen where a phone number has been written in permanent marker on their hoof, with so the phone number of the owner so that they can be contacted. A lot of them can also be microchipped, which is really good. Just a good thing to remember with microchipping is it's based out of a company, so you got to make sure you go into that company's information and keep your contact information up to date. If you move or change your phone number, a lot of people tend to forget that piece of it. You don't want your contact information to be out of date, just in case your animal gets lost or is at a shelter and they need to contact you. You don't want that to be out of date. Having photos of your animals and you with your animals is really important to have as well for identification purposes, and so that you can be reunited with them a lot easier, especially if they have any kind of unique markings on their fur or something like that. That helps a lot to make it a lot smoother for identification. So let's talk about making a plan, and really it's kind of multiple plans in a way. So prior to an emergency, there's a lot of things you want to do, really. You want to make sure that your animals get comfortable with loading and unloading into trailers. And you may want to do that with a couple different trailers, not just your normal trailer, because there might be a time where you aren't available to come and load them in your trailer, and you may have a rescue group, a volunteer group that is coming to load them up for you. So that'll be a different trailer than yours. So you want to get them comfortable with that. Also with putting halters on and walking on a lead, depending on the animal. Some, like goats and stuff, you can put leads on them as well. Make sure they're comfortable with those kinds of things. Socializing them with people, different people, that can help a lot when it comes to having to put them in trailers to move them, or just, getting into the pen with them. so that they're not as scared and freaked out with people coming around them when there's already, you know, potentially fire around them and, you know, kind of scaring them already. Making sure that your trailer or trailers and your vehicles are, you know, inspected, they're safe, they're, you know, ready to go at any time. Also with that trailer safety, practice driving the trailer. Make sure you're comfortable with that in, you know, going forward, going backward, all of that stuff so that you're ready to go. You don't have to worry about making sure that everybody is, you know, safe with driving the trailer, and so that the animals are comfortable with whoever's driving that trailer. The other really big thing is practicing. So will everything fit in your vehicle and or your trailer? So you want to make sure you can, you got enough space for all of that. Will you have to make multiple trips depending on how many animals you are going to need to evacuate? Will you need additional help? Will you need to call in friends or family with more trailers? Will you need to see if there's maybe a local rescue group or volunteer group that can be called in to help you do this? How long is it going to take you to load up all of your animals and all of your stuff? And especially if you do have to make those multiple trips. So practicing all of these things. So you want to have these drills, and you want to take notes of, you know, how long does it take? You know, what else can we maybe do different? So you want to take some notes about that. And you want to make sure that everybody in your family is involved and everybody knows all the different pieces and they can do all the different pieces of it, so that in case somebody's not home that normally would be the one to load the animals, well, maybe they're not home, so somebody else has to do that. So just doing all of that, practicing multiple times, and it comes in handy for all the practice beforehand, makes it a lot safer and a lot more calm for everybody involved, including the animals, when you have to do that then potentially in a stressful situation. It just goes a long way in keeping everybody calm. So, and just like with everything in life, the more you practice, the better you get, whether it's loading up animals or, you know, practicing a sport or practicing a musical instrument. Just more practice makes you better at it. So some other things to consider when you're making a plan, kind of like I mentioned, are you at home? So if you're at home, you know, will you be staying at home depending on what the situation is? That makes it easier. You know, all of your stuff is there. So maybe you can stay at home. That's great. If you're not at home and you need to get home, can you? Are the roads safe to get home? Is there access to get you home? And if you can't, this is a good time where you might have a neighbor or friends or family that might be able, maybe they can get to your home. Are they comfortable with your animals? Have you introduced them and showed them where everything is? So that's another thing to do ahead of time, before anything happens, is show other people that you're comfortable with on how to take care of your animals in case you can't get home in time to do that. If you have to evacuate, where can you take your animals? A lot of places tend to use local fairgrounds or rodeo grounds, especially for the larger animals, because they already have facilities and stalls that are ready to go for those animals. So you look into that before something happens. A lot of times though, you got to look into also how long can they stay there. Sometimes, you know, it might not be as long as you're hoping for, because maybe the fair is going to start soon. So hopefully, you know, we can work on how to where they can stay after that if they do have to move, or hopefully we can get them back home by then. Do you have a way to care for them at the facility where you take them? Is there a way to access more feed if you need that? So it's a lot of stuff to think about, but that's why we hope that you do this ahead of time, so you're not rushing around in the heat of the moment, if you will, for wildfires. Other things that you need to in your plan is thinking about emergency contacts. This comes into play with having an out of area contact that everybody in the family can talk to. and check in with. Also places to get information during an emergency, or places that they can call to have come help take care of their animals, or anything like that, to just be in contact with to learn what's going on. So these are some of those options for getting that information and being in communication with, in case you need help during an emergency. So getting involved, let's go to that one. There are a lot of ways to get involved. You can take different types of training. Some of it is just online, where you just, read and, learn some stuff, and then just, take in all of that knowledge and information. So these are a lot of the places and some classes that you can take, and some of the groups that you can learn from. At the bottom is the NFPA 150, which is Fire and Life Safety and Animal Housing Facilities, that I wanted to point out real quick. That is guidelines for like boarding facilities and stuff like that, for if you have any of your animals boarded or in any type of kenneling facility or something like that. Those are guidelines that they have to follow. So that's, good to know, just to keep your animals safe if somebody else is, you're housing them somewhere else. Another thing that's pretty important to read about is Firewise and Firewise communities. I know Tim will talk about this later, talk about defensible space around your property, so that hopefully that helps to keep fires away from your property, and Tim will go more into that in a little bit. So you can also work or volunteer with a lot of those agencies that were on that other page too, with your local emergency management offices, your fire, your police, and animal services. There's just so many opportunities, local rescues. There's could be local animal response groups that you can volunteer with. So, if that's something you want to do, it's great to check out, and it's a pretty rewarding opportunity to do that, to help other people. So staying informed. So for this, there are a few ways that you can do that, and some of it can vary depending on where you live, so you have to look into it a little bit. But you can always get a NOAA weather radio, which will broadcast alerts, and a lot of them you can program to your specific area. So it'll just go off when there's something weather related going on in your area. I'm gonna skip the mass notification system for just a second. The emergency alert system, that is the tone that comes across your TV with the information that might be needed if there's an emergency. So there's that one. The wireless emergency alerts are the easiest way to talk about that is that comes across, those are the amber alerts typically, but we can use those also for other emergencies as well locally. So we can tap into that. Also, your local media usually will broadcast those alerts out as well. For the mass notification systems, what those do typically is you register for that system, and there's a bunch of them out there. It just depends on what your local agency, usually emergency management, uses. So you just have to register for that, and then you put in like your address, and you can put in multiple addresses typically, and then you can you can put phone numbers and then email addresses, how you want to be contacted. So then when something happens at one of those addresses that you put in there, they'll type in, whatever kind of notification or information you need, and then everyone in that specific area, that message will go out to. So then you'll get that, even if you happen to be somewhere else, you'll still get that notification, because it is part of, where the address that you put into the system. So you'll get alerted no matter where you are, based on the address that you put into the system. And I think that is the last one for me. Yep.
All right, Josh, if you're on the line, you can unmute yourself. Josh, I'm not sure if you're able to unmute yourself just yet.
All right, we'll try that. Is that better?
Yep, there you go.
All right, I apologize for that. Good morning, all. I'm Josh Carey with American Humane. I apologize for the technical difficulties, and hopefully you guys can hear me all right now.
Yes.
So I want to talk about heat influencing or affecting large animals. Obviously, you guys have experienced a significant heat events this summer, and then continue to get it throughout the summer as well. So we just wanted to talk a little bit about, not only specific heat events, but the overall summer effects. Next slide. So the first place to start it, the conversation is with your veterinarian to understand what your animal's inherent risk might be to heat. So whether it has a pre-existing condition or a disease, primarily if it's in the respiratory system or circulatory system, that would affect their way that they can deal with the stresses of heat, but also, just certain limitations that the species have in general for heat. Some of those, whether your animals are older or very young, if they are overweight, and then how their coats or hides might affect how they deal with heat as well. As you can imagine, something like sheep or llama with their longer coats, it would affect the way that they can deal with heat on longer prolonged heat events. And then, like I said, different species will respond differently to heat. Some of them actually sweat like we do, maybe not as efficiently, but they do sweat, which allows them to cool off. But there are different body masses, which means heating and cooling take a different time frame compared to what we would think for humans heating and cooling off. So these are all great conversations to have with your vets, especially if you have multiple species, to understand their specific needs from there. The next slide, understanding heat. A lot of times we break heat down into its simplest term of temperature, but we also have to account for humidity as well, because when you combine the two, we get a heat index. And that's the effect that our human bodies and animals as well, what that actual stress is on our systems to try to cool our bodies. So the graph off onto the side kind of shows where as the temperature goes up and humidity increases, we get what we call a heat index. And that's the effect that our bodies actually feel and are trying to deal with to regulate the body's temperature. And that's for humans and animals as well. Obviously, animals don't express it the same way we can, but we'll talk about a little bit later some of the difference and changes, the signs that we will see as animals are dealing with heat. Just a quick comparison, normal temperature for horses is around 100 degrees to 101 degrees Fahrenheit. We all are familiar with our 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit for humans average temperature, so they're just a touch warmer than we are. And as I mentioned before with talking with your vets, different animals have different cooling processes to allow them to dissipate that heat. For a quick example, horses can sweat, but our cats and dogs don't sweat like we do. They might sweat from their pads, but they primarily cool off by panting. So that's just a quick example of different animals on the way in which that they can actually cool off. We'll talk about heat stress, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke coming up, but the next slide shows some basic vitals of some common large animals or barnyard animals. And you'll see that the temperatures for quite a few of them are kind of close together, but they slowly increase. You know, horses and cattle are close. Cattle can run a little bit warmer, sheep a little bit warmer than them, and then goats can run quite a bit warmer, which we would consider in other animals really starting to be heat stress and heat exhaustion if we saw temperatures getting up to that 104 degree mark. The chart also has you know, some basic pulse and respiration rates of what would be normal. Obviously, it's not as common for owners to monitor the pulse and respiration, but it is definitely something that veterinarians pay attention to. And if you were to call for assistance, those are good things to be able to relay to your veterinarian so they can kind of get an idea of what stresses the animal might be under. So all vitals are better over time to get a trend of what's going on with the animal. And this is just a snapshot of some vitals for these species. The next slide, heat stress, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. Those are very common terms that you may hear every day, mainly referring on the human side. And a lot of times in those conversations, those terms get used interchangeably, but they actually mean different things in different stages. So heat stress is the beginning phase that all people and animals experience. It's when the body starts working to try to dissipate the heat and keep our internal temperature at those averages that I spoke about. So that's, to put it in human terms, when you're sitting in a room and there isn't ventilation and you start to feel hot and maybe start to sweat or kind of get that nervous movement, fanning with your hand or something like that, that's the beginning phase of heat stress. We're trying to get rid of that extra heat to allow our body to be in that comfortable zone. So as long as our body is able to do that and find relief, it's just heat stress. Once our core temperature, and this I'm using it as a human example to relate to animals experience very similar things. Once the core temperature starts to rise and we or the animals can't dissipate heat, then we start to move into the realm of heat exhaustion, because it takes a lot of energy from a body, an animal's body or a human's body, to get rid of that heat. And if you're in that environment, either under extreme temperatures or prolonged time, that can wear the body out, causing other systems to have problems. So, and during that phase, you're exhausting the body. And as we start to see symptoms increase in severity, we're going to move from heat exhaustion to heat stroke. And that's where we're hitting a ceiling where an animal's body can no longer handle dissipating the heat, and some of the symptoms will start to change very dramatically, and some symptoms may, or some of the body's functions will stop that normally help the body cool off. For an example, in human terms, during heat exhaustion, we sweat. If we go too far into heat stroke, we can actually stop sweating, which, as you can imagine, it causes us to overheat faster and cause other problems. Similar effects can happen with animals, with changes in their respiration rate, muscle weakness, kind of uncoordination, staggering. So when these things, you start to see these kind of things, you're moving into the realm of heat stroke. Next slide, we'll talk about things that we can do. So it's key for each one of these phases, from heat stress to heat exhaustion to heat stroke. The sooner you mitigate the situation, the better the outcome for the animal. So if you start to notice that the animal has started changing their behavior because of heat stress, and you move the animal to shade and make sure they have fresh water, then that animal will do much better than if we start to move into heat exhaustion. Then you're going to need to take more dramatic steps to help that animal cool off. Some examples would be soaking wet towels and laying wet towels across them, or hosing them down with cool water, not cold water, to help mimic a similar effect as sweating does for humans naturally, as an example. So continuing to monitor the condition while you're working with the animal, focusing on areas where if it has a heavy coat, some of the areas that you can get access to cool off. So the underside, the belly, around the neck, towards the groin area, will be areas to help cool an animal off. It would be recommended to reach out to your veterinarian. That way, if they have any additional suggestions, or to make them aware that if cooling them off isn't effective, and unfortunately if it moves towards heat stroke, they're already aware of it and potentially could be en route for the farm animals, or you could then move towards moving your animal to see the vet. Because once you get to heat stroke, there's not a lot you can do on your own. You're going to need medical intervention to help that, and there's no guarantee at that phase. So it is much better to take care of at heat stress or heat exhaustion, and not go towards heat stroke, because that can have damaging effects and or unfortunately cause death in animals if you go to the heat stroke side of things. On the next slide, we'll talk about outside pet considerations. So quite a bit different than some of our small animals, where some of the solution is bringing them inside to air conditioning. That's obviously not an option for all large animals or barnyard animals. So assessing your property and making sure that there's adequate shade, that there are different surfaces for them to be in, because you'll find that there's quite a bit of different temperature. If you can go under natural shade like a tree that has grass underneath it, as opposed to an area that say has hard pack and no shade, you can have a dramatic, 30 to 40 plus degree difference being exposed to the sun. Having run-throughs that have proper, or run-ins that have proper ventilation, that allows some of the heat that would naturally build up in a building to be pushed out and still provide shade, are also great for animals to have that shelter from the heat. Making sure that you're supervising animals in and around water, especially if they are experiencing heat exhaustion, because they will have altered states of mobility, and an animal that is used to being out and around water, if it stumbles and falls in the water, obviously you could have very bad consequences if there's not assistance for that animal. Like humans, the species that sweat, we burn through a lot of nutrients doing that, primarily electrolytes. So having salt blocks and for them to replenish those nutrients while they are hydrating with plenty of fresh, cool water is all ideal to help them cope with the heat. On the next slide, we just got a couple examples of some unique enclosures to help animals kind of get out of the direct sunlight. and some of them offers some stimulation for the animals as well. One thing I didn't mention on the previous slide was if the animal is being worked for any reason, and I use the word or the term working as a broad sense, even just moving them around, avoid that during the heat of the day between 10 and 3 to minimize exposing them to more heat, and make sure it's a calmer part during those hotter parts of the day. On the next slide, transport considerations are similar. This time though, our worry is we now have animals, generally barnyard animals, in trailers. So we want to make sure, just like our cats and dogs, we don't want to leave them in a vehicle, in a parked vehicle, because the temperature can rise very quickly. For our barnyard animals, we want to make sure that we're planning ahead for the duration that they're going to be in that trailer, and that the trailers have proper ventilation, have access to, or you have supplies on hand in case there is a delay, and planning out that route. Once again, like the previous slide, avoiding the heat of the day for transporting animals from 10 to 3 if possible, especially if it's a longer trip. And then try to do those transports in the early morning and late at night, or not late at night, later in the evening. And this will also generally help you avoid traffic. You can get that moving airflow across the animals to help keep them cooler. As I mentioned before, those extra supplies at a minimum are extra water and feed. But as Heather mentioned before, some of the emergency go kits, she had a great picture of a stall or a trailer that had the equipment all ready to go. That way, whether it's an actual larger disaster or just a breakdown with the trailer, that you have the supplies handy to handle your animals until you can get the help that's needed, is extremely important anytime you're transporting animals. On the next slide, we'll touch on the disaster plans for your pets. And it's reiterating what Heather had mentioned on hers, with some questions to think about your specific property and situation with the species of animals you have. I'm focusing more on heat, but you do want to think that all hazard approach of what other things can affect you and your animals. But on the heat side, some of the specific questions were, what temperatures can you mitigate and be able to help your animals cope with those temperatures? Are you comfortable at 90 degrees of having appropriate facilities for your animals to be okay? What about when we get 100 plus, like you guys experienced earlier this year? And what are steps that you can take to try to make your property better to allow your animals to have that cooling spot to minimize those impacts? What happens when the power goes out? Does some of your mitigation factors include fans and power for the pump to run the water for your property? Do you have backup water so you can make sure that you can top off troughs and have appropriate access? Tim will speak about wildfires, but the poor air quality in wildfires causes another level of stress for animals to deal with, and could make, where they normally are able to handle a 90-degree day with clear sky or with fresh air, you add that thick layer of wildfire smoke, and that's an additional stress to where the animals can't quite cope with the added heat as well. So something to think about. We already talked about preparedness kits for your animals. And then what are the different levels that you're comfortable with and prepared to handle? Sheltering in place, having plenty of access to food and water, and those supplies, not only for your animals, but for you to maintain, so you can still provide care for your animals. Trailering capacity. If you have to evacuate your property, can you get them all in one trailer load, or do you have to take multiple loads? Like Heather had mentioned about leaving early, that way you can accommodate getting all your animals off site to keep them safe. Where are you going? Having an emergency farm buddy where you can take your animals to their property and be able to shelter them there and provide the care, the one-on-one care that would be much better than having to utilize an emergency temporary shelter being mixed around a bunch of different animals. So that one's huge if you can reach out to some of your friends that have property as well and have them in your plan to be able to shelter on their property with your animals. Some of the specific supplies for larger animals, specific to heat, are much more water. Animals will consume more water when it's hot. Having towels and things like that to where you can soak them down and drape them across them to help cool them off if needed. Spray bottles and misters. You can just use a hand pump spray bottle, and depending on what system you got, you can get the misters that you can attach to a hose to help cool off a stall or a paddock or a run or parts of those areas to create the area a little bit cooler if the humidity isn't too high. Fans for trailers or a temporary stall setup. So having fans that not only could work plugged into 110 on a generator, but also having the ability to have battery power fans too for alternate power sources. And then panels and fencing material to set up temporary stalls, like the picture on the next slide. So this picture is of a horse trailer with some panels that attach to the trailer, creating a nice little stall right next to it. You can see that they've got their troughs for hay and water. And so this would be a pretty good setup for somebody who has to move out and set something up. A lot of folks, obviously, that have large animals, they do this if they're doing trail riding events or other shows. But having something like this for the other species that you might have on your property to be able to contain chickens, goats, and whatnot. So that is some of the considerations for heat. You'll see some similarities with Tim's conversation specific to wildfires, and I'll hand it over to Tim Percival.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was great.
Thanks, Josh. So wildfires in the Pacific Northwest, Region 10, Alaska included, is something that we see a lot. I was in the fire service for several years, and it would go on 20 to 30 wildfires a year, depending on what it was. So they're pretty common. And like Josh said, there's a lot of similarities between heat and wildfire. And one of the things to think about is your animal, if the wildfire is a few miles away, and one of those is smoke. And Josh mentioned how difficult it is for animals to breathe in smoke. So one of the things that you want to think about is really to limit exercise as much as possible when that heavy smoke is in the air. And then make sure that there's water close to the feeding area, so that way when they eat, they have some nice water to clean water to drink. You may also want to try to keep the area as dust-free as possible, which is really hard to say, or really hard to do, I should say, in a barn or something, especially in wildfire season where it's usually hot and dry. But try to keep it as dust-free as possible, and possibly even soak your hay or feed. And this is something they do in California quite a bit to help try to keep some of the dust from entering into the horse's lungs and everything. And then you're going to hear this over and over again. You've heard it from Josh and from Heather, but is to evacuate early. If the smoke is pretty bad, if you have that farm buddy that's on the other side of the state or in another state or another area to get away from the smoke, that'll be the best thing to do. So move on to the next slide. So smoke is something if they've inhaled smoke, so we were talking about smoke inhalation, this can be a very serious thing. So this is a photo of me in my previous life when I was with the fire service with a barn fire where we had several horses that had inhaled smoke. And some of the things to really look for are flared nostrils, heavy or fast breathing, coughing, nasal discharge, wheezing. And, you know, one of the things that Josh mentioned, he had that slide that showed normal respirations, normal pulse and everything, is to find out what the baseline is for your animal. So if you notice on his, it had a range. And so if you know what the normal respirations are for your animal, it'll help you in a time of emergency to realize what might be abnormal. Now, keep in mind that if you just ran your horse out of a barn, of course, it's going to be breathing faster and heavier, but still having that normal baseline is going to be important. So look at these things, compare that with your normal baseline. And then if you do think that there's smoke inhalation, it's really important that you take the animal to the veterinarian. And it may be a long recovery. It can take 4 to 6 weeks or even longer sometimes for an animal to recover from smoke inhalation. So, and just like I mentioned on the previous slide, if there is smoke inhalation, then you want to limit exercise for this animal, and the veterinarian will be able to tell you more specifics on what you need to do. So next slide, please. So burns, and by the way, I should point out that these are pretty general. It might be a picture of a cow or it might be a picture of a horse, but it could be for a goat or whatever. I'm trying to be pretty general with this. But the very first thing that if there are burns, you should have a veterinarian come and triage the herd. It might, that way they can figure out which animals need treated the quickest. And there's a really good chance that some of these animals might need to be euthanized because of the burns. So it's something that you really get a veterinarian in there and be able to help your animals quickly and determine which needs the most care the quickest. So for the feet, which is a pretty common area for burns, it might take a few weeks, like 1 or 2, 3 weeks to show damage to the feet, and it's not pretty when that starts showing. So again, having that veterinarian come in, they'll be able to determine what the care is for those, or if the animal may need to be euthanized. Some minor burns might need to be treated by veterinarians, and also there might be smoke or heat-related issues to the animal's eyes. Again, the veterinarian will be able to help for that. So my point is really to, if there are burns or smoke inhalation, really to have a veterinarian come out and check your animals to see what the best care may need to be. So the next slide, please. So Heather mentioned that I'd be talking a little bit about defensible space, and so I want to talk a bit about that. But one of the things that I forgot to put in this presentation was your chains on your trailers. I saw Josh's trailer, and it just made me think, oh my goodness, I didn't mention chains. So as you're evacuating animals, as you're transporting animals, make sure you watch the chains on your trailer so that they're not rubbing or grinding on the concrete. Those sparks can actually create a fire. So make sure you pay attention to the chains. They do have some covers that you can put on them, but you want to keep those nice and short so that they're not dragging, so you don't actually cause the fire. But Heather mentioned Firewise, and Firewise is a great program. Firewise Communities is a great program for areas impacted by wildfire, and it talks about defensible space. And defensible space is where you're trying to clear the area around your house. Well, if it doesn't really talk about barns and outbuildings, but it pertains to barns and outbuildings. So one of the things that I've seen, believe it or not, is I've been out on fires and they have defensible space, But what happens is the fence catches on fire. The gate is closed, and then the fence reaches the house, and the next thing you know, the house is on fire, because that fence worked as a wick, or so that way the fire went straight to it. So make sure, if you are going to, if there is a fire and you're trying to do defensible space, you might want to make sure that there's a break in the fence, like leaving the gate open, so hopefully it won't reach the house. Another thing that we have a lot is there's a lot of times there's going to be debris outside of a building. So if you look at this particular building, it's green, which is really nice. Green pastures and green material, being trees and brushes, don't burn as quickly as brown does. So keep it green, but then also there's not a lot of debris on the outside of that. So next slide, please. The next thing is to maintain the buildings. Now, the previous building and this building are both fairly old. You want to make sure that you keep them painted. That's going to help with some prevention to fire catching, and also the roof. Make sure you pay attention to the roof to make sure that the fire won't catch on fire, or the embers from the fire won't catch the roof on fire. Then you also want to clean it annually. I would say at least annually, maybe even more. And this is really specific to your hayloft and various debris that you may have inside or around the building. That hayloft, if it can really catch that dust, can really create a fire and really spread fast if something were to take place. And then have any fuel and machinery that you might have in outbuildings outside, away from your animals. So that way, if they do start a fire, your animals aren't included in that. And in this particular photo, you can see all the brush and everything around the barn. So this doesn't have the defensible space like the previous photo did. So next slide, please. And then you want to evacuate early. Josh had mentioned this also. What happens is the roads will get backed up. People are moving their farm equipment, or people are trying to move trailers or whatever. And so it makes it to where there might be a backup even on a small farm road, or the roads might be closed due to a wildfire. Or you need to know what the distance is from you to your shelter. And I'm using the word shelter loosely. That might be the shelter where you're taking the animals for like a fairgrounds or something, or it might be your farm buddy. But if that's, 4 hours away, then that's going to mean that you need to leave early, because that's an 8-hour round trip just for that. Or you might have to do multiple trips. So if you have to do multiple 8-hour trips, you need to make sure that you evacuate early also. So next slide, please. One of the things that we talk about a lot, or I hear a lot, is when the wildfire is coming, should you just open the gate or cut the fences and let the animals loose? So next slide. What people think of when they do that is the previous picture. They just open the gate and they're off to enjoy themselves. But there are some things that you really need to think about, and the reasons that you might need to open the gates or cut the fences. One, the fire happened fairly close and it's moving too fast and you have to evacuate. You didn't have any time to prepare. Two, you have too many animals to evacuate them quickly. So you have a 2-horse trailer and 5 horses and 10 cattle. So that's multiple trips that you need to do, or that you're not prepared. And those are some reasons that you might need to open a gate or cut the fence. So next slide. But there's some things that you need to really think about with this. One, your animals may put people or animals in danger. So when they get on the roads, it may block access for emergency vehicles to be able to put out a fire or create a defensible a fire line or something like that. It also may block access for evacuees. So they may not be able to evacuate because of a herd of animals on the road, or they may not be able to move quickly because of a herd of animals on the road. You may open the fence or let the animal out, and they may actually go into an area that might be more dangerous than where they were previously. And then they may not be able to get back in because maybe they get surrounded. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't open the gate or cut the fence. It's just it's something that you really need to think about, and that should be really a last resort. And the more prepared you are, the chances are that you may not have to do that in the first place. And next slide, please. And I thank you so much. And I'll be here for questions if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you so much to all of our presenters. You guys did an amazing job. Please feel free to put any questions into the Q&A box. If you do want to contact us, we can definitely connect you with other resources. That is our email up there, FEMA-R10-communityprep@fema.dhs.gov. You can ask us any really general questions. Find additional information at ready.gov/pets. And then we also have our Region 10 Individual and Community Preparedness Dashboard, where you'll be able to see a recording of this. If you do want a copy of the slides, please feel free to email us at that email at the very top, and I will send them out. Unfortunately, just because of the platform, we don't have your emails. So if you really want to see these, we are also including a couple of other resources that some of our presenters have put together, so that we can send those out as well. And then the recording will be available at the very bottom. If you see that, it's youtube.com. So any questions? Sam, do we have anything in the chat at all?
So I am not seeing anything yet. I did get quite a few questions about just copies of all the materials. Like Tanya just said, feel free to take a picture of this slide for if there was a specific speaker that you really want to ask a question for. But if you want a copy of all materials, make sure you email us at the email on this slide and also in the question and answer. And we'll give it about 10-15 more seconds. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A.
Yes.
All right, I am not seeing anything right now. So Tanya, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. I hope you got a lot of good information. Again, if you want any of this, we're going to be sending it out. You do have to email us. And then if you want to reach out to any of our presenters, feel free to do that as well. But yeah, thank you for attending. And we hope to see you on our next webinar.